close your eyes for a second. Seriously, if you can, just take a moment. What do you see? Maybe it's not perfect blackness, right?
Probably not, no.
Maybe you see some gentle flickers or swirling shapes. These little points of light that kind of bloom and then dissolve against the dark.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Have you ever seen that and just, well, wondered what on earth it was?
I think a lot of people have.
Well, today, that's exactly what we are diving into. It's this really fascinating world of phosphenes, this often subtle, sometimes quite surprising arcs, points, sheets of light that just appear when there's no actual light coming in. What are those lights?
That's a great question.
We've got a stack of really interesting sources looking into this, and we're kicking off our deep dive today with notes from an article called We Are Luminous Beings on Phosphenes, Biophotons, and Autistic Perception by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD.
And our mission today, really, is to unpack the insights from these sources. We're going to follow this author's journey, starting with a really personal story of living with these lights, basically since childhood. Then we'll look at how science has, well, traditionally seen them, and spoiler, it's often framed as, symptoms.
Right, like something's wrong.
Exactly. But then we get into this surprising alternative theory suggesting these lights. They might not be a sign of something wrong at all.
Okay, now that's interesting. Because if they're not pathology, if they're natural, maybe even fundamental, like part of being luminous beings, what does that tell us?
Yeah, about perception, about our biology, about ourselves. And could it be especially relevant for, say, neurodivergent ways of seeing the world?
So we're going to try and pull out the most important nuggets here, understand what these internal lights might really mean.
Let's do it.
So let's unpack this source. It opens with this incredibly evocative personal account. The author describes phosphenes not as some weird thing, but as a constant companion, since they were a kid almost.
Yeah, not scary, not disruptive, just there.
Right. They compare it to like the grain you see on old home movies.
Yeah.
Or the low murmur of a river you hear through thick glass. It's just part of the background hum.
And what really jumped out at me in this description is the sensory connection the author feels. Specifically how the lights seem to, well, respond to music.
Respond to music? How so?
They mention artists like Cocteau Twins, The Orb, Orbital, LTJ Bókkon, and they describe the lights actually swirling in sync with the music.
No way.
Yeah, like stretching longer or getting blurrier with a heavy bass line, or darting in these finer, sharper lines when there's like fast drum and bass snares.
Huh. So it wasn't just random visual noise then. It had rhythm, a kind of tone.
Exactly that.
Sure.
For the author, these lights came with a tone and a tempo. And crucially, they stressed that they never saw these as symptoms, never thought something was wrong.
Just part of their internal world.
Yeah, just an ambient part of my mind's weather system is how they put it. And this beautiful phrase, a gentle visual stimming. It didn't need a big meaning or diagnosis to just feel like it belonged.
Okay, so you have this really deeply ingrained, natural, almost sort of musical experience with these lights. What happens when the author decides to actually look it up, research it?
Well, that's when things take a sharp turn. The author describes looking up phosphenes and immediately falling into what they call, quite starkly, the medical model's waiting jaws.
Oof. Okay, and what does that look like? What's the medical view?
It's almost entirely clinical. Phosphenes get framed purely as symptoms. They're talked about as a result of migraines or epilepsy, retinal trauma, optic nerve damage.
Oh, wow.
Multiple sclerosis, radiation therapy, even medically induced things.
So the overwhelming story you find if you go looking is basically something is wrong, something's broken.
Precisely. They're cataloged like symptoms: how often, how intense, how long they last.
Yeah.
And this part of the article really emphasizes what the author felt was this jarring absence in all that clinical writing.
An absence of what?
Any language for, well, naturalness or wonder, or even a way to think about it in terms of neurodivergent experience. It seems like the standard view just doesn't have much room for the idea that maybe, for some people, these lights are just how they are.
A totally normal part of their perception.
Exactly. Which is why finding the work of István Bókkon was such a huge moment, like finding a light in that clinical darkness. The author found this 2008 paper by Bókkon, Phosphene Phenomenon, a New Concept.
A new concept. Okay, I'm intrigued. What did Bókkon suggest that was so different?
Okay, so get this. This completely flips the script.
Yeah.
Bókkon suggested that phosphenes aren't just, neurological static or signs of something going wrong, They're not symptoms in that way at all.
Okay. If they're not a malfunction, what are they then?
His big idea is that phosphenes are quite literally light.
Wait, actual light.
Actual photons, yeah, which he calls biophotons,
Hmm?
emitted by the cells of our own visual system.
Hold on. You're saying it's not just my brain interpreting something as light, but there's
Yeah.
actual light being produced inside my eyes or brain.
According to Bókkon's theory, yes.
Hmm.
These are super faint, ultra-weak flashes, but they come from ordinary, everyday metabolic processes happening in our cells, specifically oxidative activity in the brain. And under the right circumstances, like closing your eyes in a dark room, maybe we become consciously aware of these biophotons.
Wow. Okay, so seeing these lights isn't a glitch. It's more like glimpsing the natural glow of your own biology.
That's precisely the implication the author takes from Bókkon. It's not pathology, it's not an error. It suggests that, bioluminescence isn't just for fireflies and deep-sea fish.
It's in us, too.
It lives within us. We have this kind of intrinsic light.
And that potential science, it connects so perfectly back to the author's personal feeling from the start, doesn't it? Bókkon's theory gives a kind of scientific language for that lifelong sense the author had.
Absolutely. It provides a potential scientific grounding for that metaphor the author used, calling the Phosphenes the lighting crew for the theater of my mind.
Right, that was a great line.
Yeah, like they're the ambient stagecraft. They cue the moment, soften the edges, get the scene ready. They don't have to mean something specific. They just illuminate.
And this really clicks with how the author describes their own perception style being a Gestalt processor, perceiving things in atmospheres where the mood is the meaning and shape and sound are tied together.
Exactly. For someone wired like that, it makes total sense that the phosphenes wouldn't just be random dots. They'd arrive with a certain tone, a tempo, just like the author felt with the music.
Like the slow drift with ambient techno or the sharp lines with drum and bass.
Or those long, glowing arcs with Cocteau Twins, yeah.
Yeah.
They aren't symbols standing for something else.
They are something. Atmosphere, presence.
Invitation, maybe? Like that ghost light in a theater, the single bulb left on stage. It just reminds you something is always present, something's always about to start. They're part of that inner stage where memories and images and imagination play out.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, the author makes an important point here. While this way of experiencing things is really interesting, they clarify it's not classical synesthesia.
Okay, good distinction. So it's not like seeing the letter A as red or tasting shapes.
Right. It's not that kind of direct, specific mapping from one sense to another. The author describes their perception differently. Letters aren't colors. They're like inhabited spaces.
Inhabited spaces.
Yeah, like little scenes with characters and stories and backgrounds, almost like a Richard Scarry book, they say. It's like entering a whole world, not just translating a symbol.
Gotcha. So it's an entry point, not a code.
Exactly. And that's relevant because the phosphenes work similarly in their experience. They aren't symbols either. They don't represent something else.
They just belong.
They belong to the inner landscape, the whole sensory ecology. Perception for this author is thematic, narrative, scenic. A light might cue a story, a sound folds into an image, a pattern brings up a memory. The phosphenes are just part of the set dressing, the stage, the whole feeling.
And pulling Bókkon's science together with this really personal lived experience that leads to this powerful idea in the article. We are luminous beings.
Yeah, that phrase from Bókkon, that biophotons are common intrinsic emissions. Not pathological, but foundational to biological life. The author says that felt almost sacred.
I can see why. It completely reframes the idea that seeing these lights or having unusual perception means you're damaged or broken somehow.
Right. And it ties into that feeling of shining.
Mm-hmm.
The author mentions the lyric "We Shine" from a song called Glitter and feeling this deep resonance, like it wasn't just a metaphor.
It felt literally true.
Yes, and this becomes especially powerful when the author connects it to their own autistic system, their GLP wiring. GLP being Gestalt language processing.
Right, seeing the whole picture first, patterns, atmospheres.
Exactly. So if your mind naturally works that way, building stories and constellations, thoughts feeling like whole rooms, language being relational and scenic.
Then why wouldn't your biology, your physical system kind of mirror that? Why wouldn't you be built to, well, glow?
It totally reframes the phosphenes. They're not signs of malfunction anymore. They become, as the author puts it, evidence of participation, of motion, of life happening from the inside out.
Wow. That sense of a biological imperative shining like glitter. It stops being just poetry.
It feels more like cellular truth, maybe. Kind of clockwork radiance. The
Huh.
idea that we're not just passively waiting for external light, we are the light.
We shine, shimmer, flicker, even if no one else sees it.
Exactly.
And this whole perspective really throws the difference between the two approaches into sharp relief, doesn't it? You've got the medical model asking what's wrong.
And then you have the author's lived experience, boosted by Bokkon's theory, insisting on meaning, metaphor, even joy.
Yeah.
From this angle, the Phosphenes themselves almost become this quiet act of rebellion. You can't really govern them with pathological terms. They just ask to be felt as warmth, as shimmer, as presence.
And that brings in the importance of wonder, which the author highlights.
Right. They wonder how many other people, especially maybe neurodivergent folks, see these lights just naturally. Experience kinds of sensory poetry that don't fit into neat boxes. How many have just woven this inner light into the fabric of their being without needing a label for it?
Or feeling like they needed fixing.
Precisely. And so, insisting on beauty, refusing to let your experience be flattened into just symptoms, seeing your own shining as a biological fact, that becomes a kind of resistance, doesn't it?
Yeah, resistance against a world that often pathologizes difference.
The author's point is beautiful. Science didn't rescue the idea of shining from whimsy. Whimsy, the lived experience, kind of already knew.
So let's try and connect this all back for everyone listening. Our deep dive today took us from just noticing lights behind your closed eyes.
Which seems like such a simple thing.
Right, through the traditional view that often says, that might be a symptom.
To this really different scientific idea about intrinsic bioluminescence, actual light within us.
And ultimately to this powerful reframing of sensory experience, especially perhaps for neurodivergent minds, suggesting that what looks different might just be evidence of another valid, luminous way of being.
Yeah, the core message we can distill from this source, I think, is pretty clear. There's light in you, in all of us.
Some of it science might explain eventually, some maybe not, but as the author says, all of it belongs.
It's really a gentle invitation, isn't it? To just pay attention, to notice the subtle stuff, the often unnoticed details that shape how you experience the world.
Like the lights behind your eyes, maybe? Or the textures you find yourself drawn to, the little scenes that play out in your mind?
Yeah, to just honor what feels true for you, even if it doesn't need explaining or a diagnosis.
Think about that theater metaphor one last time. The house lights go down, the stage is empty but full of potential, and then in the quiet dark, there's that flicker, that shimmer.
Not a big signal, not a huge show. Just
Right.
light, waiting. Just the beginning.
So if you've ever seen that shimmer in the dark and felt curious, or watched shapes drift behind your eyelids and felt, maybe strangely, accompanied, you are definitely not alone. You are not imagining things.